January 31st, 1945. Clark Air Base, Luzon, Philippines. Major Frank T. McCoy climbs through the inspection panels of an intact Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber. Tail number 763-12. The aircraft sits gleaming on the tarmac, abandoned by its crew during the American advance. McCoy commands the Technical Air Intelligence Unit Southwest Pacific. He's examined dozens of crashed Japanese aircraft across the theater. Zeros, vals, kates. He knows Japanese design philosophy. Lightweight construction, minimal armor, maximum performance. But nothing prepares him for what he finds inside the Betty's wings. The fuel tanks are completely unprotected. No self-sealing rubber compound, no armor plating, no fire suppression systems, no protective coatings of any kind. Just thin aluminum skin, perhaps 2 millimeters thick, separating thousands of liters of high-octane aviation fuel from enemy machine gun fire. McCoy stares at the exposed tanks. This cannot be their standard design. No Air Force would build bombers this way. He photographs everything, documents every detail, measures the aluminum thickness, examines the tank construction, traces the fuel lines. The evidence is undeniable. This isn't battle damage. This isn't field modification. This isn't a prototype or experimental aircraft. This is standard Japanese design. The bomber measures nearly 20 meters from nose to tail. Wings span 25 meters tip to tip. Twin 14-cylinder radial engines producing 1,500 horsepower each. The fuselage is a perfect cylinder, justifying its Allied nickname. A massive cigar resting on tricycle landing gear, but inside those wings, positioned exactly where enemy fire would strike them, sit 8 unprotected fuel tanks, 4 in each wing. 4,780 liters of aviation gasoline waiting for a spark. McCoy's team spends 3 weeks dismantling and documenting every system. Their report, classified secret, and distributed to all Allied air forces, will revolutionize American understanding of Japanese aviation doctrine. The mathematics of this discovery will reshape tactical thinking for the remainder of the war. Every assumption American pilots held about enemy capabilities, about the price Japanese engineers were willing to pay for performance, about the value imperial forces placed on crew survival, is about to be systematically demolished by the evidence contained within this single, pristine bomber. But the question burns in every analyst's mind. Why? Why would Japanese engineers deliberately build a bomber with such catastrophic vulnerability? The answer requires going back 4 years. Back to the moment when Japanese planners decided that range mattered more than survival. December 8, 1941. As smoke still rises from Pearl Harbor, 82 G4M bombers and 26 G3M bombers lift off from bases on Formosa. Their target: Clark Field itself, the primary American air base in the Philippines. The attack achieves complete tactical surprise. Arriving at 12:35 in the afternoon, the Japanese formation flies at 20,000 feet, beyond the reach of American anti-aircraft guns. 27 bombers from the initial wave drop 636 bombs across Clark Field's runways and facilities. Moments later, 0 fighters sweep in at treetop level. Their machine guns destroy every aircraft that survived the bombing run. Of 17 B-17 flying fortresses on the ground, 12 are destroyed outright. Nearly every P-40 Warhawk fighter is reduced to burning wreckage. In 45 minutes, American air power in the Philippines is effectively eliminated. Lieutenant James Harrington, one of the few surviving American pilots, watches from a bomb shelter as the Japanese formation withdraws to the north. What struck me was how they came in, he later writes in his combat report. Perfect formation, high altitude, totally beyond our reach. Then the fighters dropped down and tore us apart. We couldn't get a single plane airborne. But the Betty bombers themselves depart untouched. The few American fighters that managed to get airborne arrive too late, finding only empty sky. The Japanese have demonstrated their bombers' exceptional range, striking from bases 460 miles away, a feat no American bomber can match at this stage of the war. 2 days later, the Betty proves its devastating effectiveness again. December 10, 1941. 26 G4M bombers join with older G3M Nell bombers in attacking Force Z, a British naval task force built around the battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Repulse. The attack begins at approximately 12:20 in the afternoon. Japanese bombers approach in coordinated waves, their torpedo runs executed with precision that stuns British observers. The Betty bombers carry Type 91 aerial torpedoes, each weighing 840 kilograms with a 205-kilogram warhead. The torpedoes are designed specifically for shallow water operations, running at depths that can strike ships even in coastal waters. The torpedo attacks focus on the two capital ships with devastating accuracy. Prince of Wales, a battleship displacing 43,000 tons and representing the newest generation of British naval power, takes at least 6 torpedo hits, along with damage from level bombers. The underwater explosions rip massive holes in the ship's hull. Flooding overwhelms damage control efforts. The battleship begins listing severely. Repulse, a battlecruiser built during World War I but modernized in the 1930s, absorbs at least 4 torpedo hits while attempting to evade the attacking aircraft. The ship's anti-aircraft fire claims several Japanese aircraft, but it cannot prevent the coordinated torpedo runs from finding their targets. The cumulative damage proves fatal. Both capital ships capsize and sink within hours of the attack. Prince of Wales goes down at approximately 13:20 hours. Repulse follows at approximately 13:33 hours. 841 British sailors die. The survivors are rescued by escorting destroyers. The engagement lasts less than 2 hours from first contact to final sinking. For the first time in naval history, capital ships actively defending themselves have been sunk solely by air power while in the open sea. The G4M Betty bomber has achieved what naval theorists debated for decades. British naval superiority in Asian waters has been shattered in 90 minutes. Across the Pacific theatre through early 1942, the Betty operates with apparent impunity. American and Allied pilots encounter Betty bombers in every major engagement. The aircraft seems to strike targets at ranges that defy conventional understanding. They hit Darwin, Australia, from bases 1,500 miles away, demonstrating reach that exceeds any Allied bomber's capability. They attack Port Moresby from airfields across New Guinea's mountain ranges, maintaining pressure on Allied positions throughout the southwest Pacific. They strike Guadalcanal from Rabaul, a distance exceeding 600 miles, projecting Japanese air power across vast ocean expanses. The Betty's operational range gives Japanese forces strategic flexibility that Allied commanders struggle to counter. American fighters based at forward positions lack the range to intercept Betty bombers departing from distant bases. Allied airfields come under attack from Japanese bases that are themselves beyond Allied striking range. The asymmetry in bomber capability means that Japanese forces can attack at will, while Allied forces struggle to retaliate effectively. This advantage persists through the first 6 months of the war. Betty bombers participate in virtually every Japanese offensive operation across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. They strike targets in the Philippines, Malaya, Netherlands, East Indies, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. They support naval operations throughout the theatre. They perform reconnaissance missions that exceed the range of any Allied aircraft. The Betty becomes the symbol of Japanese air power's reach and effectiveness, but the advantage depends entirely on limited Allied fighter opposition. When Betty formations can strike without interception, when they can approach targets at high altitude beyond anti-aircraft range, when they can deliver weapons and depart before fighters arrive, the aircraft is devastatingly effective. These conditions characterize operations during the first half of 1942, when Allied air strength remains limited and dispersed. But by mid-1942, the tactical picture begins to change. As American fighter strength increases, as Wildcats give way to more capable Hellcats and Corsairs, as pilot training improves and tactical doctrine evolves, Betty crews begin reporting disturbing losses. The shift becomes undeniable on August 8, 1942. 23 G4M bombers from the 4th Air Group depart Rabaul to attack American positions at Guadalcanal. American fighters intercept the formation over Savo Island. In the engagement that follows, 18 of the 23 Betty bombers are shot down. Approximately 120 aviators die in what becomes the single worst G4M loss during the entire campaign. Fighter pilots report the same observation across every engagement. The Betty explodes into flames with minimal hits. 2 or 3 rounds anywhere along the fuselage or wings produce catastrophic results. The aircraft earns grim nicknames that spread rapidly through American squadrons: Flying Cigar, One-Shot Lighter, Flying Zippo, all references to the Betty's terrifying tendency to bloom into fire from battle damage. Lieutenant Marion Carl pulls his F4F Wildcat into firing position behind a Betty bomber over Savo Island. He's flown dozens of combat missions, shot down his share of zeros, but this is his first clean engagement with a Betty formation. He opens fire. 650 caliber machine guns converge on the bomber's fuselage. The rounds walk up the side toward the wing route, maybe a 2-second burst. Perhaps 20 rounds find their target. The Betty detonates. One moment it's a bomber in level flight. The next, it's a massive fireball tumbling toward the ocean. Pieces of flaming wreckage spin away in all directions. Carl pulls hard right to avoid debris. He's stunned by what just happened. That was too easy. Around him, the rest of his squadron is making the same discovery. Wildcats tear through the Betty formation. Bombers explode with almost every burst. Some catch fire before they can complete their bomb runs. Others explode so violently they take pieces of their wingmen with them. The ocean below fills with debris and spreading oil slicks. Parachutes dot the sky. Most don't have time to deploy. The Bettys explode too fast. Crews die before they can bail out. By the time the surviving 5 Bettys turn for home, 18 of their formation are gone. 120 Japanese aviators dead. The worst single mission loss the Betty will suffer during the entire Guadalcanal campaign. But it's just the beginning. August 9th brings more losses. August 10th adds to the carnage. By the end of August, the 4th Air Group has been effectively destroyed as an operational unit. September offers no respite. Betty formations continue striking American positions at Guadalcanal. American fighters continue destroying them in overwhelming numbers. By October 1942, when Lieutenant Commander John Thomas Blackburn arrives at Guadalcanal commanding VF-17 flying F4U Corsairs, the Betty's reputation has transformed completely. First time we caught a Betty formation, we couldn't believe how easy they went down. Blackburn later reports, hit them anywhere along the fuselage or wings, and they'd explode. We actively hunted them, recognizing them as among the most vulnerable targets in Pacific skies. American pilots developed tactics specifically for Betty formations. Approach from below and behind, target the wing routes where they join the fuselage. Short bursts. Don't waste ammunition. 1 Betty equals approximately 5 seconds of firing time, sometimes less. The nicknames spread through every fighter squadron in the Pacific. Flying Cigar, One-Shot Lighter, Flying Zippo, Honorable Lighter, all references to the same terrifying characteristic. The Betty catches fire from anything, but American pilots don't understand why. They know the Betty is vulnerable. They know it explodes easily. They don't know the reason. Not yet. The first clues come in November 1942. Australian forces overrun Japanese airfields at Buna in Papua New Guinea. Among the abandoned aircraft, technical air intelligence units discover Betty bombers with varying levels of damage. Initial examinations confirm what pilots have reported. The fuel tanks have no protection whatsoever. Aeronautical engineers with the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit Southwest Pacific conduct the first detailed analysis. They remove wing access panels. What they find inside shocks them. Fuel cells with no protective measures, thin aluminum construction, no rubber sealant layer, no protective coating, no fire suppression systems. Multiple Betty bombers examined at Buna show identical characteristics. This is not battle damage. This is not field modification. This is standard Japanese design. The implications are staggering. American bombers by 1942 universally feature self-sealing fuel tanks. The B-17 Flying Fortress incorporated them from the B-17C model onward. The B-24 Liberator featured them from the XB-24B prototype. Even fighter aircraft like the P-38 and P-47 feature protected fuel systems. Self-sealing fuel tanks use layered rubber compound that swells on contact with fuel when punctured by bullets or shell fragments, sealing holes and preventing fuel loss and fire. The technology adds substantial weight to aircraft, but it dramatically improves crew survival rates. American military doctrine considers this weight penalty essential and non-negotiable. Yet here is Japan's primary land-based bomber, produced in thousands, operating across the entire Pacific theater, with fuel tanks that offer zero protection. The weight saved by eliminating self-sealing systems, armor plating, and fire suppression equipment is immediately apparent. But the cost in crew lives is becoming equally obvious in loss statistics that mount with every engagement. The captured Betty at Clark Field in January 1945 provides the most complete technical analysis. Major McCoy and his team document every system. Their report details specifications that explain both the Betty's extraordinary capabilities and its catastrophic vulnerabilities. The G4M Model 1 specifications reveal an aircraft optimized ruthlessly for range and speed. Empty weight of 6,741 kilograms, remarkably light for a bomber of its size. Maximum takeoff weight of 9,500 kilograms. Fuel capacity of 4,780 litres distributed across 8 unprotected tanks, 4 in each wing, positioned in the wing's centre section where they are most vulnerable to combat damage. Top speed of 428 km per hour, approximately 265 miles per hour. Maximum range of 634 kilometers, exceeding 3,700 miles. Service ceiling of 8,500 meters. Crew complement of 7 members, including pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, and 2 gunners. The fuel system design is particularly revealing. The 8 tanks are arranged in 4 groups of 2, positioned along the wing's longitudinal axis, where the wing joins the fuselage. This placement maximizes fuel capacity by utilizing the thickest portion of the wing structure, but it also positions the tanks directly in the path of enemy fire during combat. Any attack from the side or below inevitably strikes fuel tanks. The aluminum construction provides no protection. The absence of self-sealing compounds means that even small punctures leak fuel continuously. American engineers calculate that the weight saved by eliminating protection systems exceeds 500 kilograms per aircraft. This weight savings translates directly into additional fuel capacity and extended range. But the cost in vulnerability is equally calculable. Combat reports show that Betty bombers hit anywhere in the wing area explode with near certainty. The unprotected tanks create what engineers term a critical failure point, a single system whose destruction guarantees loss of the entire aircraft. These numbers tell the story of design choices made in September 1937, when the Japanese Navy issued requirements that would define the G4M's entire existence. Top speed of 398 km per hour, cruising altitude of 3,000 meters, range of 4,722 kilometers unloaded, or 3,700 kilometers carrying 800 kilograms of bombs or torpedoes. The requirements reflect Japanese naval strategy in the late 1930s. Japan's empire stretches across vast Pacific distances. Naval bases are separated by thousands of kilometers of ocean. The Navy needs bombers capable of striking enemy positions far beyond the range of carrier aircraft. Bombers that can operate from land bases to support naval operations across the entire theater. Existing Japanese bombers fall far short of these requirements. The G3M Nell bomber, then in service, has a maximum range of approximately 3,000 kilometers. American bombers like the B-17 have even more limited range in their early variants. No bomber in service anywhere in the world in 1937 can strike targets at the distances Japanese planners envision. The Navy's requirements are not arbitrary. They are calculated based on the distances Japanese forces will need to cover in any future Pacific conflict. From Formosa to the Philippines, 460 miles. From Rabaul to Guadalcanal, 600 miles. From Japanese home islands to potential targets across the Pacific, thousands of miles. The bomber that can meet these requirements will give Japan strategic reach that no other nation possesses. But the requirements also reflect assumptions about future warfare that will prove catastrophically wrong. Japanese planners assume that surprise and initiative will provide protection for long-range bombers. They assume that enemy fighter opposition will be limited by range and numbers. They assume that the war will be decided quickly, before enemy industrial capacity can generate overwhelming force. Every assumption will prove false. The man tasked with achieving the impossible is Kiro Honjo. He leads the Mitsubishi design team after taking over from Joji Hattori. Honjo studied bomber design at Junkers in Germany during the early 1930s, absorbing European aeronautical engineering principles and manufacturing techniques before returning to Japan. He understands immediately that meeting the Navy's requirements will demand compromises that Western air forces would never accept. Honjo assembles a team of engineers at Mitsubishi's Nagoya facilities to tackle the design challenges. The team analyzes every aspect of bomber design, calculating weight budgets for every component and system. They study existing bombers from multiple nations, identifying where weight can be reduced without compromising structural integrity. They experiment with new construction techniques and materials that might offer weight savings. The mathematics are brutally simple. To achieve the required range, the aircraft needs massive fuel capacity. Each litre of aviation fuel weighs approximately 0.8 kilograms. 4,780 litres of fuel means approximately 3,800 kilograms of fuel weight at full load. To achieve the required speed with this fuel load, the aircraft needs minimal weight. Every kilogram added to the empty weight reduces either range or payload capacity. These two requirements exist in direct opposition. Fuel is heavy. Protection systems are heavy. Armor plating weighing hundreds of kilograms would be required to protect crew positions and vital systems. Self-sealing fuel tanks add substantial weight through the rubber compounds and additional structure required. Fire suppression systems add weight. Redundant safety measures add weight. The cumulative weight of adequate protection would prevent achieving the required performance. Honjo makes the decision that will define the G4M throughout its service life. Protection will be sacrificed for performance. The fuel tanks will be unprotected aluminum construction, no self-sealing compounds, no armor plating around fuel cells, no fire suppression systems beyond basic fire extinguishers, no redundant safety measures. Every kilogram saved will be invested in fuel capacity, range, and achieving the Navy's performance specifications. The decision is not made lightly. Honjo understands the risks. His team calculates the vulnerabilities that unprotected fuel tanks will create. They know that combat damage to the wings will likely prove catastrophic, but they also know that the Navy's requirements cannot be met any other way with available technology. The choice is between an aircraft that meets performance specifications with known vulnerabilities or an aircraft that fails to meet requirements but offers better protection. The Navy has demanded performance. Honjo delivers performance. The first G4M prototype flies on October 23, 1939. The aircraft meets every performance requirement the Navy specified. Speed exceeds expectations. Range surpasses projections. Payload capacity satisfies operational needs. The bomber enters production as the Navy Type 1 attack bomber. Mitsubishi builds the aircraft at plants in Nagoya. Initial production models, designated G4M Model 1, begin reaching operational units in April 1941. By December 1941, approximately 180 G4Ms are in service with the Japanese Navy. These aircraft form the backbone of Japanese land-based air power throughout the Pacific War. The Betty's combat debut at Clark Field and against Force Z demonstrates the wisdom of Honjo's design priorities in the specific conditions of early 1942, when facing limited opposition, when achieving surprise, when operating beyond the range of enemy fighters. The Betty is devastatingly effective. Its range allows strikes from bases that enemies consider safe. Its speed permits rapid penetration of target areas. Its payload delivers meaningful damage. But these advantages depend entirely on the assumption that Betty formations will face minimal opposition. The moment American fighter strength increases, The moment interception becomes routine. The moment sustained combat becomes inevitable. Every design choice that prioritized range over protection becomes a death sentence for crews. The Guadalcanal campaign exposes the fundamental flaw in the Betty's design philosophy. From August through October 1942, more than 100 G4M bombers are lost with their crews, a sustained bloodletting that Japanese air forces cannot sustain. The single mission on August 8 alone destroys 18 of 23 aircraft. Approximately 120 aviators killed. The pattern repeats with brutal consistency throughout the campaign. Betty formations depart from Rabaul. Fly 600 miles to Guadalcanal. Engage American fighters. Suffer catastrophic losses. August 9th sees additional bombers lost. August 10th brings more losses. By the end of August, the 4th Air Group has been effectively destroyed as an operational unit. September brings no respite. Betty formations continue striking American positions at Guadalcanal. American fighters continue destroying them in overwhelming numbers. The mathematics are inexorable. Japanese forces need to strike American positions to contest control of the island. Betty bombers provide the only means of delivering meaningful strike capability from Rabaul, but every mission results in losses that cannot be replaced. October sees the pattern continue. American fighter strength increases as more squadrons arrive at Henderson Field. Pilot quality improves as combat experience accumulates. Tactical doctrine evolves to exploit Betty vulnerabilities more effectively. Japanese losses accelerate even as the number of bombers available for missions declines. By November, when the Guadalcanal campaign effectively ends with Japanese withdrawal, Betty losses exceed 100 aircraft. Crew casualties approach 700 men dead. The exchange rate is unsustainable. Japan's most capable land-based bomber has been rendered obsolete by its own vulnerabilities, transformed from a feared weapon into what American pilots call easy meat. Japanese planners had expected losses. All military operations involve casualties, but the scale of Betty losses exceeds every projection. The unprotected fuel tanks that permitted 6,000-kilometer range also guarantee that any hit to wings or fuselage will likely prove fatal. There is no middle ground, no wounded bombers limping home, no damaged but survivable aircraft. Betty bombers either return untouched or explode in flames. By mid-1943, Japanese engineers recognized that modifications are essential. Starting with the 663rd aircraft produced in March 1943, 30mm rubber sheets are installed beneath wing surfaces where fuel tanks are located. These sheets are not true self-sealing tanks. They are a compromise measure, adding minimal weight while providing limited protection against fuel leakage. The modification reduces top speed by 9 km per hour. Maximum range decreases by 315 km, but crew survival rates show no significant improvement. The rubber sheets can slow fuel leakage from small caliber hits. They cannot prevent fires from larger caliber rounds or cannon shells. They cannot stop explosions when tracers ignite fuel vapor. The fundamental vulnerability remains unchanged. Japanese designers attempt more comprehensive protection with the G4M Model 3, introduced in October 1944. This variant features actual self-sealing fuel tanks, with capacity reduced to 4,490 litres to accommodate the leak-blocking material. The modification reduces maximum range to 3,640 kilometres, a loss of more than 2,000 kilometres compared to the original G4M Model 1. Approximately 60 G4M Model 3 aircraft are produced by war's end. The modification comes too late and in too limited numbers to affect the Betty's combat record. By late 1944, American air superiority is so complete that no level of fuel tank protection would permit Betty bombers to operate effectively. The war's outcome has already been determined. The Betty's vulnerability becomes so notorious that it influences American intelligence operations in ways that highlight the dangers Japanese crews face. On April 18, 1943, the Betty bomber becomes the instrument of Admiral Yamamoto's death, an engagement that demonstrates both American signals, intelligence capabilities, and the aircraft's fatal weaknesses. American codebreakers intercept Japanese communications, indicating that Yamamoto will fly from Rabaul to Bougainville on April 18th. The Admiral will travel aboard a G-4M bomber with a fighter escort. 18 P-38 Lightnings from the 339th Fighter Squadron are assigned to intercept the flight, though only 16 actually fly the mission after one aircraft blows a tire on takeoff and another suffers drop tank failures. The mission requires extraordinary precision. The P-38 must fly over 400 miles at wave-top height to avoid radar detection, navigate across open ocean without landmarks, and arrive at exactly the calculated intercept point at exactly the calculated time. Any error in navigation, any deviation in timing, will result in mission failure. The intercept must occur within a narrow window when Yamamoto's aircraft will be vulnerable. The P-38 depart Guadalcanal at 7:25 in the morning. They fly at 50 feet above the ocean for over 400 miles, maintaining strict radio silence. Navigation is by dead reckoning and timing. The formation arrives at the calculated intercept point with precision that will become legendary in aviation history. At 9:34 in the morning, exactly on schedule, and exactly 1 minute ahead of the calculated intercept time, the P-38 spot Yamamoto's formation. 2 Betty bombers flying at low altitude with 6 Zero fighters as escort. Captain Thomas Lanphier and First Lieutenant Rex Barber break from the formation to engage the bombers, while other P-38 hold off the Zero fighters. Barber engages the lead Betty bomber, which carries Admiral Yamamoto. The bomber takes hits to the wing area, where the unprotected fuel tanks are located. The aircraft explodes in flames and crashes in the jungle. Yamamoto's body is recovered the following day. He had been killed by injuries sustained during the crash. The second Betty bomber also crashes, killing all aboard. The operation demonstrates multiple aspects of Allied superiority. American signals intelligence can read Japanese communications in real time. American navigation and timing are precise enough to intercept a single aircraft across hundreds of miles of open ocean, and American fighters can destroy Betty bombers with minimal difficulty. But it's the last point that resonates most strongly with Japanese commanders. The man who conceived Pearl Harbor, the architect of Japan's early Pacific victories, dies because he's traveling in an aircraft that explodes when hit anywhere in the wings. If Yamamoto had been aboard a transport aircraft with protected fuel tanks, if he had traveled by ship, if Japanese engineers had prioritized crew survival over range, the outcome might have been different. But Yamamoto travels in a Betty, and Betties burn. The Betty's vulnerability extends beyond conventional bomber operations. In the war's final year, the aircraft becomes a carrier for one of Japan's most desperate weapons. The Yokosuka MXY-7 Ohka, a rocket-powered kamikaze aircraft that American forces call baka, Japanese for foolish. The Ohka is a piloted bomb, a small aircraft with a 1,200-kilogram warhead in the nose, 3 solid-fuel rockets in the tail, and just enough control surfaces to guide it into a target. The weapon has no landing gear, no way to return. The pilot commits to death the moment he launches. The Betty carries the Ohka beneath its fuselage, flies to within range of Allied ships, releases the Ohka. The kamikaze pilot ignites the rockets and dives toward the target at speeds exceeding 650 kilometers per hour, too fast for anti-aircraft fire to track effectively. In theory, it's a devastating weapon. In practice, it becomes another death sentence for Betty crews. March 21st, 1945. 18 Betty bombers carrying Ohka weapons depart Kanoya Air Base to attack American ships off Okinawa. Zero fighters provide escort, but American radar detects the formation while it's still far from the target area. 50 Hellcats from multiple carriers intercept the Betty formation. The bombers, laden with Ohka weapons beneath their fuselages, are even more vulnerable than usual. The external load reduces speed and maneuverability, making the Bettys easy targets for the American fighters. The engagement is a massacre. All 18 Betty bombers are shot down. None get close enough to launch their Ohka weapons. 55 Japanese aviators die. The Ohka pilots die without ever having a chance to carry out their suicide missions, killed in their mother ships before reaching release range. Additional Ohka missions follow similar patterns. Betty bombers struggle to reach launch ranges while carrying the heavy weapons. American fighters intercept them with devastating efficiency. The few Ohkas that do launch achieve minimal success. The weapon system proves tactically ineffective, but it demonstrates the depths of desperation Japanese forces have reached by 1945, using their most vulnerable bomber to carry suicide weapons against increasingly hopeless odds. The Betty, designed in 1938 to project Japanese power across the Pacific, has become a vehicle for last-ditch kamikaze attacks. By war's end, approximately 2,414 G-4M bombers have been produced. Exact loss figures remain disputed, but estimates suggest that more than 60% were lost in combat. Crew casualties number in the thousands. The Betty served throughout the Pacific War. From the first day to the last, it participated in virtually every major operation. It demonstrated extraordinary range and payload capacity. It achieved significant victories in the war's early months, but it also became synonymous with vulnerability, with catastrophic fire, with crews burning alive in aircraft that exploded from minimal battle damage. The design choice made in 1938, the decision to sacrifice protection for range, defined the Betty's entire service life. American forces recognized this vulnerability and exploited it ruthlessly. Betty formations became priority targets. Easy kills. American pilots actively hunted them. Tactical doctrine evolved specifically to maximize Betty losses. The captured Betty at Clark Field in January 1945 provided final confirmation of what American pilots already knew from combat experience. Japanese engineers had built a bomber with no meaningful protection. A bomber that turned fuel tanks into bombs waiting to explode. A bomber that killed its own crews through design choices that prioritized performance over survival. Major McCoy's report documented these choices in exhaustive technical detail, but the real story was already written in the loss statistics, in the wreckage scattered across the Pacific, in the oil slicks marking where Bettys had exploded and sunk, in the 700 men who died during the Guadalcanal campaign alone. The G-4M Betty represents a fundamental divergence in aviation philosophy between Japanese and American forces. American doctrine, by 1942, treated crew survival as non-negotiable. Self-sealing tanks, armor protection, redundant systems, these added weight and reduced performance, but they brought damaged bombers home. They kept crews alive to fly again. Japanese doctrine, shaped by resource constraints and strategic requirements, made different calculations. Range exceeded survival in priority. Performance exceeded protection. The assumption that surprise and fighter escort would provide adequate defense. The belief that the war would be decided quickly. These assumptions drove design choices that proved catastrophic when the war became a grinding attrition campaign. The Betty bomber flew its last combat missions in August 1945. By then, American air superiority was absolute. Japanese fuel stocks were depleted. Trained crews were gone. The strategic situation was hopeless. But even at the end, Bettys still burned when hit, still exploded with minimal damage, still killed their crews with the same efficiency they had demonstrated since Guadalcanal 3 years earlier. The design flaw built into the aircraft in 1938 remained unchanged, a testament to the price of the choices Kiro Honjo and his team made when they decided that Japan needed a bomber with 3,700-mile range more than it needed a bomber that could protect its crews. The mathematics were simple, the physics were unforgiving, and thousands of Japanese aviators paid the price in fire.